Fake it till you make it. And that sounds ridiculous, but act like the person that you want to be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's how you become that person. If you want to.
Okay, we have returned. We are here. Back in the flesh.
Partially. Trying to figure out where the camera's at.
Kyle's at 60% currently.
Yep. And that's being generous.
Pep him up. Yeah. 60% with a limp.
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
Yeah.
You know how to rally.
People.
Yes.
You know?
All the peoples.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about people and different experiences and how everybody loves to try and segment themselves from everybody else and like, oh, I would never do that. Scoff. It's like, no, you might.
You might have done it.
Where this really stemmed from. Now, probably going to lose a lot of people here, but you just need to stick with it, okay? And you need to be honest with yourselves, folks. Talking to you people out there, specifically ones with kids.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Well, you might be appalled when I first start talking, but just give it time. You gotta let it marinate.
All right, let's hear it.
So where this kind of stemmed from is, I think, were we eating dinner one night, and Atlas has just been going through some stuff lately. You know what I mean? He's 3.5, and he's just trying to figure out his place in the world, and we're trying to figure out how to parent effectively for him. And so there's a lot of rebellion. There's a lot of, he told me not to touch that. Well, touch, like that sort of thing. And so I think it was dinner. I think Maverick was in his high chair and he was like crying, naked with food in his hair, as he does sometimes as a 10-month-old. Oh, yeah. And then Atlas was crying about something. Like tonight, he was crying because I made burgers and I put his burger all together in the bun and everything, and then cut it in half, make it easier for him to bite into. And he was like crying because I cut it in half. I want it back together. Yeah, well, that's impossible. Can't do that. So,
why would you give me this half floppy piece of crap burger when you're holding the big one? That's
exactly what he said. Well, yours isn't cut in half. I'm like, I'll cut it in half if you want me to. And I was like, your mouth isn't as big as mine, buddy. Okay? Yeah. So, anyway. So he was crying about something. Probably something like that. And so they were both kind of, crying and making noise. And at this point in parenting, if I could give anyone, any new parent, any unsolicited parenting advice, it would be, they're going to cry. You know what I mean? They're going to cry. There's nothing you can do about it. They will cry, and you just need to understand that it's not a bad thing necessarily, right? Sometimes they just got to cry. And even as babies, and you can't avoid it, so just take a breath. Take a breath. Yes. Like, it's so easy to get overwhelmed, especially with your first kid and they're crying. You're like, how do I make it stop? It's 2 a.m. But once you come to the realization that it's inevitable, like it's gonna happen. So you just need to come to the realization, like, as you go to sleep at night, my kid's gonna wake me up. Yes. I think the mistake I was making was, fingers crossed they don't wake me up. I'm going to go to bed and like, oh yeah, hopefully they don't wake me up. Like there was a chance it was going to happen. I could sleep through the night.
Be so angry.
Yeah. And so then they cry and they wake me up and I'm like, no. So just go into it knowing like, yeah, they're going to wake me up, and just you have to accept it. And you have to accept that they're going to cry and just take a breath. It's okay.
Yes.
So anyway, so that's, I've been able to kind of pick that up pretty well at this point. And so they were doing that. And I at the time, I wasn't overwhelmed. Not to say that I don't get overwhelmed by them, but I was just kind of like eating my food and kind of just like thinking, and I'm like, this is chaos. I'm okay with it, right? This is, allowable chaos, but this is chaos right now. And I look at Caitlin and I'm like, yeah. And here's the appalling part, but you just got to hear me out, folks. But it's like, I'm like, yeah, I know before I ever had kids, I would hear, oh, this mother did that, like drowned her children and everything. I'm like, oh my gosh, what a horrible person. Which, yes, I still agree. Like, that's a horrible, hellacious thing to do. Still on board with that.
Yes.
But what I had said, and listen to my words carefully, is that I can understand how someone might end up in that position. Not that I ever would. I personally would never drown my children or kill them in any way on purpose. And so, but it's one of those, like, imagine, right? Same scene, only a new parent, a single mother, right? Or a single father, whatever, but single parent, 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, low income. You've been working all day long. You work all day, every day. You're exhausted. You're coming home, doing what you can for the kids. And these kids are crying because they don't know any better. And they're screaming. And your boyfriend that you have a terrible relationship with, but you go back to him for whatever reason, like, he dumps you, he leaves you, or like you just got fired from your job, or like, and these things stack up and they stack up and they stack up. And like, you hit this point where you just snap, I would imagine. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy for me growing up in a loving household that I did, Christian household, and having loving parents and sisters, and having the relationships that I've had. And thank God, like, I have been spared a lot of heartache and tragedy that other people haven't. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and so it's easy for me growing up in that type of environment to be like, yeah, of course I would never drown my children. Like, you're a horrible person and you deserve to burn in hell. We all deserve to burn in hell. Let's just put that out there. But, that was my thought in the past. And it's like, we're not so different. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I would make the same decision. However, throwing back to the homeless the conversation about homeless people that we had, however many weeks ago. But it's like, had I grown up with the same set of circumstances, and had I been stuffed in a broom closet 90% of my childhood and lit cigarettes put out on my body, and abused mentally and physically and sexually and all sorts of stuff. Who knows where I would be? You know what I mean? I might be rubbing the lotion on the skin, or it gets the hose again. Like, I don't know. It's like, I would like to think not, but I also, God has been my anchor. He's always been there. I've never known a day without him. I've tried, as my teenage years and into college and everything, I tried, but I've never known a day without him, which I am eternally grateful. Mom, Dad, thank you. But so it's easy to judge from the outside, and so one thing that you and I were talking about is like Nazi Germany. Everybody loves to be like, yeah, if I lived in Germany at that time, like, I'd be the one standing up. And it's like, nah, probably not. Probably not. Odds are not in your favor.
No.
And no. It's just like, you have to try and understand. Like, you'll never fully be able to understand unless you've walked in their shoes, right? You've been through their experiences. But like, we have to, as people, we have to try and understand that. I think as Christians, we lose sight of that a lot. Especially in modern times, like across the political aisle. Our battle is not with the people. As Christians, our battle is not with the people. Our battle is with the evil. It's the spirits that are, have tormented, whether it be these people or whatever. And it's like, it's not against the people. We need to show them love. They will know we are Christians by our love. And so it's like, you have to, like, these are hurt people. They didn't just, most of them, some people rebelled, I'm sure. And there's, some of that, there's caveats to everything, but most of them weren't raised in an environment like I did. Most of them didn't have a wonderful relationship with their father like I did. My dad is one of my favorite people on the face of this earth. My grandpa was one of my favorite people on the face of this earth. To have that, relationship with my grandpa and my dad, really helped set me on the path that, I rebelled, but because of them and God, I came back. So it's just, we have to remember that we're not so different, right? We like to think we are.
Definitely.
And, I would never do that. Me, scoff. It's like, no, we're all human beings. Hitler was a human being. Hitler was not an alien. He wasn't this, evil creature born in the pits of hell. Maybe some of the spirits that were tormenting him and everything, they were. But he started out as a human being, an image bearer of God, fearfully and wonderfully made, the same as the rest of us. And we can't forget that. So that's where really all this, kind of started, is just wanted to talk about that and bring that to anyone who's still listening to this thing that we call a podcast. And just try and, change hearts and minds. That's what it's all about, right? Changing hearts and minds. And if you can't do that, then 2 to the heart and 1 to the mind.
That's what they preach down in Texas. Now we've got it. But I mean, you're 100% correct. And I think it's one of the things that, actually has been drilled into my brain as a counselor, that you have to have that ability to empathize, because it's a human condition. And when we're in a space of suffering, we learn by modeling long before we understand language. We learn by body language, modeling, all these things, because obviously we don't have a language. We cry. That's pretty much our language, is cry. And you're trying to figure out the frequency to figure out what the child's needing. But everything's model-based learning in the beginning. And ironically, that stays true. So one of the things is, you can say something to your kid, but if what you say doesn't match what you're modeling, they'll go off the model over what you say. And so that's something that I think is really important, is that gets ingrained really deep in. So unhealthy behaviors, poor modeling, all these different things, really painful experiences, you don't know how to cope. You don't know how to cope with things. You don't know how to cope with stress. I was actually talking to a client today about how impactful rough play is with dads with their children. And what it does is it allows them to get really dysregulated, and then the dad laughs or hugs them or comforts them, but in kind of a rough way, and be like, it's okay. I always remember you would be with oh my gosh, I'm blanking.
Atlas.
I just keep thinking of Atlas, but no, this is before Atlas. But he looks just
Hunter.
like Atlas. Hunter. My goodness, I couldn't think of his name. But I always remember with Hunter, anytime he would fall,
Hunter's my nephew, by the way.
What?
Said Hunter's my nephew. By the way.
Yeah. Hunter is your nephew. But you would be like, oh yeah, good job. You're like, sweet dude. And it was this concept of him being able to be really dysregulated, and then you being like, hey, it's okay. And ironically, people don't realize, but a dad throwing a kid up in the air and catching them and then being scared and then calming down, it actually helps them develop the ability to be in stressful situations and then calm themselves, which is one of the reasons, and again, there's a myriad of reasons, but one of the reasons why people without fathers struggle when they are dealing with difficulty and end up going much farther than those who have fathers, because they learn, of course, discipline and all these different things, but that rough play helps them learn to be dysregulated and then come back down. They know that they can calm down. They know they have that ability. Kids that don't get that, they don't know that. They don't know that they're going to have that part. And so it just feels it can go way farther to the point where they're, violent or, catch themselves in a really unhealthy space. And so I think there's this part that we just realize, just like you were saying, our healthy upbringing, our loving parents, they do so much more than we can even fathom for why we are as healthy as we are, which is in reality why I think God emphasizes the importance of a parent raising their children up in the right way, and how that really does lead to very good things. They won't stray far because of the fact, again, and this is ideally, and in most circumstances, they usually are much healthier based off of that. And those that don't have that or have a very negative experience with that, it causes a lot of damage that you don't know how to function in. And so being a counselor, I constantly am trying to understand stuff that I never experienced. And it's all through that concept of empathy to try to understand it from their experience. And, one of the things that I think it was the most difficult was dealing with someone who had been sexually abused, and then also counseling an abuser that had formerly abused and processing that. And you start to realize that they came from brokenness. From my experiences with clients, never have I met an abuser that's not been abused, in some form or fashion. So you start to realize that negative impact
hurt people.
Exactly. And so you start to realize I wasn't hurt. So I really don't know how I would be in that space. I would hope that I would not do that. But a lot of the good things that are instilled in me was given to me by my family's, my parents' love and guidance. So I don't know. I don't know how I would be without that there.
Well, I mean, it goes back to homeless, right? I mean, when we talked about that, it's something that I've realized in my later years that, when I was younger, I'd see a homeless person on the side of the road or whatever, and just be like, man, if I was ever in that position, if I just right now, everything was taken away from me, give me a couple months and I'll have a job. I'll start working at McDonald's if I have to, and save up my money and get an apartment, blah, blah, blah. And it's that's so easy for me to say. And it's true. You know what I mean? It's probably true in that instance, is that, I would be able to make it out of that. But that's me. That's my experiences. That's me growing up in a loving Christian home and having the experiences I currently have, but again, throw yourself, take all of that away. And, exactly. I wasn't, let's say I wasn't able to learn coping mechanisms, and I wasn't loved by anyone and had no one to encourage me. And then I find drugs. It's of course.
Exactly.
I've said it before. So I won't drop any names. But in high school, right, I had a friend. You had a friend that was unfortunately became addicted to pain pills, opioids, I think in particular is how it started, but then drugs, just in general. And it was back then, it was one of those things that kind of overlooked it at first because I was a rebel, I was smoking weed and everything. And so, he just happens to be into that stuff. And I wasn't really realizing what was going on. You know what I mean? I wasn't trying to help my friend. At certain points I was an enabler. And then I started to realize holy crap, this is a problem, man. Get it together. What the heck? And blah, blah, blah. And then he may or may not have stolen some money from me, like this big thing. And finally I kind of was just like, I'm done with this, and washed my hands clean. And it was in my mind, it was easy for me to separate myself from him and be like, no, this is like, no, that's ridiculous. I can't believe you're addicted to these drugs and you're doing this to your friends and blah, 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 blah. But then like, as I get older, and it's, to my knowledge, it started, he had shoulder surgery, and was prescribed opioids, and then became addicted. And so I actually later in life ended up having probably a similar shoulder surgery. Had been subscribed to opioids and everything. And even me, right? Like I said, upbringing I had, and I don't want to get too much into his story, but he had a traumatic event when he was younger, very, very traumatic event when he was younger, and caused a lot of depression and anxiety and issues like that all throughout his childhood. And then growing up, and then all of a sudden you get these pain pills, and it's like, I remember taking the opioids, and there were times that like, I'd been prescribed, but I certainly was abusing them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, in the sense that I was taking them more often than I should. I liked the way they made me feel. And so I have said, as I've gotten older and had been prescribed those types of things, been like, I have never been addicted to opioids, but I can see why people get addicted to opioids. Right. Yeah. And that's, I had a major traumatic event in my life. I haven't had those issues. So now it makes perfect sense as to how that even started, is that you have this traumatic. So, and for him, he did live from the outside, we were very good friends. I spent a lot of time over at his place. Before the traumatic event, we were fourth grade, so we were young, but I remember being there often. And then also afterwards into high school and everything like that. And he had a good life. He lived up, or grew up relatively wealthy. So you're like, oh, what the heck? But that one traumatic event, which was a very, very traumatic event. And it just makes so much sense. It's like, of course, if I were hurting like that, if I had gone through something like that and I was hurting and I was depressed like that, and then I was prescribed from a doctor, these opioids, and they made me feel the way they did. Yeah. You bet your bottom dollar I'm going to freaking take those and abuse them. Like, why wouldn't that be an immediate, like, holy crap, it numbs everything, and I need this. And of course it just makes total sense, that progression. And
absolutely.
Anyway, I don't want to talk too much. There's another line of thinking that it, probably get a little bit more controversial. Maybe we'll save that for later in the podcast, but you and I have kind of talked about it, or touched on it in Marco Polo's, but
well, so like, I think that's the part that's a universal element, specifically with the aspect of, drugs, but any vice, is the wanting to avoid pain. That's one of our main drives, and it's a survival mechanism. The reason, it helps us to live, because we don't want to do painful things like putting your hand on a hot stove. No. Pain helps you to realize, like, take your hand off before it gets burnt off.
And even chronic pain, which is something that something that I've kind of thought about somewhat recently as well, is that people who may not have gone through a traumatic mental event or or anything like that, or emotionally damaging event, but then suffer from chronic pain from whatever, maybe some sort of injury or something, because there have been like a week, right, where I just went through this pain, or even my my brain fog. Apparently I'm experiencing it now, but brain fog and like just that pressure build up. I mean, I was constantly complaining about it, and it was just always there, and it was getting worse and worse. And that's something that from start to finish, because I haven't had it in quite a while, but from start to finish, I mean, I probably experienced it for probably about a year. It was very few and far between at the beginning, and then more and more frequent until I finally figured out what was going on. But it's like, just something like that. I was just like, I just want this to end. Like, I was just progressively getting more and more desperate. And so I can only imagine people who are in even more pain than that, and just born into that type of pain. And it's like, it just makes so much more sense. And I have had to go through specific experiences to then finally have that epiphany of like, duh, you idiot. Like, of course, like, you're not far from making those decisions.
Exactly.
You're just a couple of, traumatic events away from potentially making decisions like that.
Yeah. Which is where the compassion and understanding is so key, because most of the time we're really hard on things that would be like, that's a you thing. I would never do that. Mm-hmm. How often have you done it? How often have you experienced that thing? We usually are very loud about things that we don't struggle with, and very quiet about things that we do. And that's, often I think a very important part is to recognize that you want to be able to go, well, especially if I don't know. And if I do know, most likely I don't know exactly the same. Because like you said, the background, your experience, whether it's traumatic or not, all these things go into play. Now, again, this doesn't take away from what's right or wrong. And I think that's, an important part. Like, obviously, the whole Hitler thing, whether he had a traumatic experience or whether all that stuff, still wrong, still had to be dealt with, all of those parts.
Yep.
But it is, I think, the most useful part.
That's where the 2 to the heart and 1 to the mind come in, right?
Exactly. But that's where I think it's still beneficial to be empathetic towards it. Yeah, and to recognize that, and I think that's why that God emphasized, like, all have fallen short of the glory of God. Everyone. And so, because we often bring like, oh, well, this sin's way worse than that sin, and we quantify that within our society, because we obviously have to, for punishment and different things like that. But to God, it does not matter. It's all sinful, which means we all fall into that category. And I think that really helps if we really truly live that way, to be very gracious and understanding to other people's struggles. Because if we don't, and oftentimes I think Christians struggle with this, they go, well, certain things are worse. And so when that's that worst thing that you're doing, then I can judge you harshly, because that's a worse one. And again, societal and Christian concepts are different. And so even though they're built off of that, we can't just be like, oh, a pedophile is fine, we can just love them. They still have to stop doing what they're doing and go through that process.
Still love them as a image bearer of God, someone who's created in his image.
Yes.
But obviously, I mean, evil deeds still need to be stopped. But yes. I mean, that was what I was talking about before, that like another kind of example, but it shows like a different side of it, I guess, is that type of progression, right? With pedophilia, or insert whatever sinful fetish, that someone might have. But it doesn't start that way. Right. I would argue probably for like 98% of individuals that wind up in a position like that, it doesn't start that way. Right. It's not. And now I'm not trying to justify it. Again, I'm going to make that very, very clear. If you have issues with finding children attractive, seek help immediately. And any time that there's any type of situation, they need to be punished to the full extent of the law. But I also deserve to be punished to the full extent of the law, and God's law in particular. Right. Yeah. So we're all sinners, but it's the progression, right? It's these little, it's 1,000 micro, steps, I guess, down that path. Yeah, and I think it's like, I've struggled with pornography. That I think I brought it up on the podcast before. I've struggled with pornography in my life, and if I didn't have God, who knows where that would lead? You know what I mean? Like if it's this, you're always trying to find, like, just like drug or like pills or, you know, whatever, your body builds a tolerance really to anything. Caffeine, you know, it's a drug, but you know, your body builds a tolerance. So then you need more of it to continue to get the same effect. So same thing with pornographic material, right? You know, it's, you start to desensitize yourself to it. And then what's next? What's the next level? What's the next level? Well, what's in it? So it's this, a million different micro steps towards oblivion, essentially. And it, of course, right? When you think of it that way, if they don't have God in their life, that's just like, none of us should be shocked by it. You know what I mean? Like that it should be obvious. That is, I'm shocked that there isn't more of it out there. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, well, Sound of Freedom, obviously there's quite a bit of it out there, but in part of that actually kind of stems from The Basement, that podcast that you had kind of put me onto, wherein he talks about with Disney, right? Disney putting a gay couple openly, you know, it's what the first, I think Lightyear was like the first animated movie that had the like first same-sex kiss or something like that. I don't remember. Whatever. And all these Christians are just like shocked. Oh my gosh. And like, what the heck? In our kids' movies. And it's like, why are you surprised? Like, yes, we should, like, don't let your kids watch that. Like, don't support that. But at the same time, you shouldn't be surprised. It's a godless company. Right? Disney is not a
Christian company,
Christ-centered company. So why wouldn't they? Like, it's just a natural progression. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, it's reflective of the culture.
Yeah, we should have been anticipating this for decades.
Shocked that it hasn't happened sooner.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part. Actually, one of the things that Ted Bundy actually said, he goes, "You want to make sure you don't make another me." He goes, "Stop all pornography," because he goes, "I was watching porn. I became addicted and I was angry. And so they morphed together and it had to get more aggressive and more violent to be able to have that. And then my sexual arousal and my anger morphed. And so I was only aroused by pain." And so he goes, and then from the pain of his girlfriend and all these different things, he then took that into violence himself. But he's like, "I promise you that if I didn't have pornography, I would have had to figure out a different way to cope. And I don't know if I would be here." And he's like, "You just don't understand the progression and the danger with what is there." And especially, he goes, what is available. And so it's funny because, you know, we were talking about all this, like, oh, you know, because we had a really good background. He's like, I had great parents. He's like, I had good Christian family. They were loving. They were supportive. He obviously also had a mental illness that he was experiencing, but he's like, I didn't have a reason, but you know, obsessive nature, to a certain extent, he struggled with like psychopathic tendencies of struggle with emotional connection, but he it just goes to show that like there's a danger with unhealthy habits.
Sin.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
Sin breeds death in all forms, you know what I mean?
Yes,
and if you allow yourself to go down the path of sin, you will find yourself down the natural progression of sin. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that is oblivion. And
you don't know what oblivion is going to look like. And that's the scary part.
And it's just, it makes total sense when you stop and think about it. And it's like, that's still a human being, right? It's not some scary monster. It's a human, and you are one of them, right? Like that's you. That's still you. You know, you have to understand that. Who was it Carl Jung that was real big into, you know, talking about like kind of being in touch with your shadow and understanding like your shadow
concept.
And that's something that I've thought about. I haven't quite, you know, looked into a lot of it, but you know, ties into Jordan Peterson, and one of my favorite quotes from him is is that a good man is not a weak man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has it under voluntary control.
Yeah. Mm.
You know, and it's almost as like they are in touch with their shadow. I get knowing the atrocities that they are capable of as human beings and not choosing that.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That's actual strength.
Yeah, that's what makes a good man.
In reality, and I think we've kind of talked about this before, that's what makes Christ the strongest man in the world. Yeah. Because he could have snapped his fingers.
It makes him the best man, like, you know, not even strength, but, you know, goodness. It makes him the goodest man to ever walk.
The goodest man. Here. But I mean, in reality, you think about it. I mean, he just snapped his fingers and obliterated the universe and just been like, yeah, we'll start over. We've got eternity. We'll just make a new universe, a new existence. And let's just do this over again. So he had he was the most dangerous person.
The most dangerous man who had it under the most voluntary control.
Yes. And so that becomes a part where we start to recognize
he is the archetype.
He is of everything in reality.
Well, because again, and I don't want to throw this back to Jordan Peterson again, but he also talks about, you know, the passion story, right, and him being up on the cross, and it's essentially it's the worst conceivable thing to happen to the least deserving person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's what it is. And that's what he endured for us. Yeah. Is he, you know, the least deserving person endured the worst conceivable punishment for us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, and ironically, the reason why is because he had the most immense empathy for our struggle. It's the reason why he stepped out of heaven. It's the reason why he came down as a man. It's because he's like, you know what? I want to experience the struggle that you have to then be able to do it for you, because I see you cannot do it yourself because of the, you know, immeasurable weight. We can't deal with the immeasurable weight of our one life, and he had to do it for all life. And it becomes this part where you start to recognize the power of Christ was his empathy.
Compels you.
That's why he could be. Sorry. That's why he could be around sinners. He could be around Pharisees. He could be around well-educated. He could be around people that were treated poorly. You know, it didn't matter because he could empathize. That's a bit
redundant.
What?
He started out with sinners and then listed just different groups of sinners.
Yeah, well, just in case you were wondering what those would be.
He could be around sinners.
I did say intelligent.
Yeah, he's just surrounded by sinners. He was the only non-sinner.
He was.
On the face of the earth.
I know, which I feel like that'd be weird. But anyway, so you think about it. I feel like it would be weird just like coming to earth and be like, gosh, you all suck.
He's the living word of God. I mean,
obviously it would be weird for me.
He's always been
I'm talking about in the beginning there was
the word.
And him just being
like,
the word
was God. The word was with
you
God.
guys all suck. Like, what have I done? You guys all just, every one of you.
Well, he knew that before he came down to earth.
But it's
different,
he loves us. Like when you know about something and then you're like physically there and you're like, oh man, this place has gone to crap. It's like
visiting Chicago.
Yeah, you like see the picture of the really nice hotel you're about to go to, and then you get there and you're like, oh gosh. Mm-hmm. You're like, it wasn't, you've heard.
No, I don't think that was the case. Run down.
You've heard it's run down a little bit, but you get there, you're like, oh, this place is a shithole. But then he loved us anyways. I'm just saying.
Yes, he did.
Again. So that's what we're supposed to be striving for. But what we often do is the exact opposite. Like, he had no reason to be humble. He did not need to be humble because he was perfect. So there was he had no requirement to be humble towards broken sinners. Yet he was. Now, ironically, broken sinners don't like to be humble. So it's like complete backwards. It's like the concept of like he literally did turn everything upside down. But
that's why you have to die to yourself every single day. Pick up your cross. Follow him.
Which, I think that's another universal part. The fact that we all are going to fall short, and being able to give each other grace, give yourself grace, or accept grace. So accept grace for yourself, and making sure that you're allowing that to flow through to others. Because a lot of times we don't accept it ourselves, which is why we don't like other people doing the things that we struggle with, because we won't actually give ourselves the grace that's already been given and really take it on. But that's the whole deal. That's how you
it's kind
function in life.
Yeah, well, it's like I brought this up in regards to pornography and everything, and when I would give in to temptation, and afterwards I always felt like a giant piece of crap, and then I would do I'm going to avoid God, right? I'm not going to pray before I go to bed that night because I don't want to face Him, and it's like you're not hiding from God. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you can hide from Him.
I don't
He knows
speak to you. You will know.
And yes, we are sinners. We are backsliding serpents. I am a backsliding serpent of a man. You know what I mean? Like I'm so quick to judge the Israelites when I read the Bible of like.
What
Moses God literally just parted the Red Sea through Moses, got you out of Egypt. You guys made the mistake, so you're the one wandering the desert for, ever and ever. And then Moses goes up to up the mountain to talk to God and get the commandments from God. And he comes down, and here you are making a calf. Right?
It was a long time, Kyle. And it was a long time, and the Red Sea wasn't even that deep. So
it was like a slight breeze, whatever. But I just remember like reading those, and even still sometimes I catch myself like I read it, and they're like talking about how, man, we should just go back to Egypt. At least we had security there somewhat. And it's like, what are you talking about? You guys just left there. Like, this doesn't make any sense. It's like I do that all the time. I do that all the
100%
time. I sin, and then I ask for forgiveness. I go to church, on Sunday, and I get fired up, and like, we are blessed to have a wonderful church with wonderful pastors, and like I just get fired up every time I go in the worship, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go out into the world, and then come Sunday night, sometimes on my worst weeks, but like Sunday night.
5
Here comes temptation creeping into my head. Yeah, losing my mind on public roads in Austin, being behind the wheel. It's like, nope, that is exactly the opposite of what you learned, and what God wants for you. And here I am looking back at my Egypt. You know what I mean? What is my Egypt that I'm looking back at? What is my golden calf that I'm creating? The moment God turns His back. No, that's terrible. Shouldn't say that. God never turns His back. The moment I turn my back.
Oh, so glad that we're hundreds of miles
that was a
away.
wonderful conversation. Great, glad we were able to touch base and sin. Immediate sin. Exactly. It's like, what the heck? What is wrong with me? But you have to be able to accept God's grace, and in order to move forward, like bringing it full circle back to the pornography example, is that's exactly what Satan wants, is for you to be like, man, I'm a giant POS and I need to hide from God because I'm so ashamed. It's like, that's what Satan wants. Not only did you let him win, you gave him the victory by giving into temptation and giving into your sin, but now it's a double victory because you are separating yourself further from God, which is exactly what He wants. You know what I mean? That's exactly what the enemy wants. And so rather than being so ashamed of yourself, you need to face your consequences. You need to own up to your mistakes. You need to ask for forgiveness, but you need to fall into the embrace of, your loving father who's waiting for you. You know what I mean? Like the prodigal son returns. He will, his love meter never drops. All he asks is that you know, turn to him and ask for forgiveness, and you know, like, and that's it. That's it. Yeah, I say that's it. Like it's the easiest thing. But on paper,
it's not the hardest thing.
Super easy. Yeah, just don't do it. Just suck less. I don't know what to tell you. You know? It's just super easy.
But yeah, I mean, it's again, it's complicated. It's complicated because of the fact that we're so easily distracted by so many things that don't really matter. Really, like if you think about it, if you're thinking from a Christian standpoint, right? You and I kind of mentioned that in the Marco Polo. You accept God as your Savior, right? From then on, because you're going to be you're eternal either way, one direction or the other. Yeah, you're an eternal being. Yep. You've now gone eternal with God. From now on, your main focus is to worship and glorify God. That's your main purpose in life, because that's what you're going to do for eternity. So you might as well start now. But the trick of Earth is that it will distract you with a billion things away from that purpose. And what you should do is actually quite simple. But the amount of things that you can get over focused on is the complicated part, because that's why a lot of times, like you'll see in like third world countries where their faith is massive, huge, exponentially more than people who are in first world countries.
Yeah,
because first world countries, they're like, we literally
focused on pleasure.
Yeah, they're
that's
like, we're
the main focus of the society.
We're dependent on him to grow our food. We're dependent on him for everything, for us to breathe. Like their main focus is God and dependency on him. We literally think we do all of it ourselves. So, and then we have pleasures.
Yeah, I'm trying to
exponentially to get distracted from. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like this is the issue, because in reality, our life could be very simple and much more enjoyable if we didn't get distracted by things that have no actual eternal value, which is what Christ was doing all the time. But this is the thing. All of us struggle with that. There is not a person on this earth that doesn't struggle with that. They may do better than another person, but all of us struggle with that.
Yeah. Well, to kind of bring it. So I just heard this quote for the first time, like yesterday or 2 days ago, at Paideia Week for my son's new school.
Cool.
And well, yeah, it's awesome. It's turning up the gain on my mic. Yeah, it's awesome. Super excited. Super pumped. This whole week has just got me like jacked up. So, but it's from Corey Ten Boom. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but
interesting.
She and her family lived in Europe. I can't remember the specific country during World War II, and they hid Jews, and then were caught. And her father and sister, I think, she ended up being in a concentration camp and everything. But the quote is, you can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have. That comes from her time in the concentration camp and losing her entire family and everything like that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it just, Jesus talks about it all the time. You know what I mean? Like giving up your possessions and, picking up your cross and follow. Like it's not like he's being literal. Right, the cross is a symbol of torture. Right, it's a torture device, and it's like, I hope you're ready for some suffering. If you want to follow me, that's what's in store. You know, eternal life, is in store for you. But in the short term, you're about to suffer. You know what I mean? As Christ did, which you should revel in that almost. I know that sounds weird. It's a foreign concept to some people, but like, the Bible even talks about suffering as Christ did, and being, I mean, you're almost able to connect with him on a more deep level if you can, lean into your suffering like that and understand that, like, regardless of my suffering, Christ suffered infinitesimally more than I can. And it's just like, yeah, I really like that quote, because I think that kind of goes into the first world, third world country sort of thing, where in the first world countries were so developed that survival is not the main focus. Right? Like we have all these things in place that ensure our short-term survival. And, we don't focus on that. It's pleasure. It's luxury now. Right? That's what we're all focused on. That's the American dream is luxury and getting the house and getting the car and that sort of thing. Whereas in other countries, it's still survival. Yes, Christians are persecuted. Like we think we have it bad as Christians here in the United States, which, sure, it's getting worse, but Christians are being, I would say, more openly targeted for slander. You know what I mean? But it is, it's a freaking drop in a bucket compared to the rest. Christians in basically every other country have to endure and go through, to be a Christian, right? You know, the danger that they face just because they call themselves a Christian, and it's, being excommunicated from their families because they've gone from Islam to Christianity or Hinduism to Christianity or whatever it is, and like burned alive. I mean, just that type of faith is faith that most Western Christians will never experience, unfortunately, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's an important part. Ironically, there was I
shouldn't say most, but a lot of Western Christians.
There was a missionary who was overseas in China in these secret churches. And one of the things that he was saying is like, she's like, man, it must be so difficult to be a Christian nation, because they were stuck on this part of like, you will suffer being my follower. It's like, oh my goodness, your nation just must be suffering all the time because they're a Christian nation. And they're like, no, like you get to be a Christian there. And they're like, they're not suffering? And they're like, no, like there's a freedom, so you can be a Christian there. And they're like, ooh, that's not good. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, if you're not suffering, then you're not suffering like Christ, then you are not a Christian. And he's like, oh, well, let me talk. But he's like, that kind of hit me so hard. He's like, because if I'm not having some form of suffering, he goes, it doesn't mean like suffering just specifically like they are, or they're in secret or whatever. But if I'm not dealing with backlash, he goes, because Christianity is countercultural to the world. So you should be the odd one out within a cultural context that aren't Christian. And he's like, it was such an interesting concept for me to be able to say like, well, why am I not suffering? Like, there's a lot of non-Christians around me. Why aren't they not being like, either like, what's happening here? Or I'm not even having conversations. Like, I would just like blend right in. Like, no one would see difference in me. And that's what that person was saying. He goes, we literally have to hide because they'll kill us. You guys are out and about. Nobody knows who you are. Like, nobody can tell you from a different person. Like, it made no sense to them because of that. And so it's just an interesting concept to think about that within our daily lives.
Yep.
So there you go, people. We told you everything you need to know about them.
All about people.
All about the people.
Yeah, we're stupid easy.
We really are.
Yeah,
very simple.
We're easy.
Simple
we're all
creatures.
The same, but different.
But different. But
still same.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
Yep.
That's the end.
Yeah.
You have everything you need now. Now you can go off and be
That's
nice.
how you explain everything we just talked about. That's how you explain it to your 3.5-year-old.
Exactly. We are same.
We
But
are different faces, but still same. Truer words have never been said.
Never been spoken. I'm telling you what. Well done. That's all we needed. We could have done this entire thing in like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I've been done with it. Drop the mic.
That shows that we like to do like 55 minutes of rambling for what could be said in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, Ethan had texted me, oh man, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and it asked, like, for those of you who don't know, I like to collect video game stuff. I've got all sorts of collectibles and things hanging around. Anyway, so it asked if I wanted. He was like, "Yeah, I'm getting rid of my PlayStation 4 or whatever. Do you want it?" I'm like, "No, I'm selling off some stuff." And he was like, "For what?" And rather than just being like, "Because I want the money," I was like, "Oh, because I'm planning a trip to Germany and I'm doing this and I'm doing and I've got these things like planned and I want the money for this and that." And I go into grave detail, and then he just texts back and he's like, "Yeah, that's a lot to unpack right in one text." And then, then I started thinking, I'm like, yeah, I totally could have just summed it up by saying, like, because I want to spend the money on other stuff. That's not me. That's not me. That's why I don't have, that's why I have a podcast. So,
yes, that's what the space is for. And so we brought it to you. So you are welcome. Now you know everything you need to know about people. And the main thing is empathize. That's pretty much what you need to do.
Yep.
Empathize with others.
2 main takeaways.
That's
empathy and so 2 main takeaways. Hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds.
Bam.
And if that doesn't work, 2 to the heart, 1 to the mind. It's my story and I'm sticking to it.
There you go. Now you have everything you need. So we hope that you do some of the things that we said, not all of them.
Don't drown your kids in a bathtub.
Yeah. Try to steer clear of that one. But, don't be mean to the people who have done it in your heart. Yeah. I'll go with that. In your heart.
They still deserve punishment.
Yes, I said in your heart. They're still going to go to prison and pay their dues. Yeah. But be nice to them in your heart. So
one thing that I've been trying to do lately to try and change that in my mindset and everything, and especially across the political aisle, because I've been known to get wrapped up in the us and them, and it's like no. We're all human beings here. I drove past somebody recently, and they had a bumper sticker. It was a pride flag with the whole friggin' trans thing incorporated and all that stuff. And my normal thought would be like, "Oh, this a-hole, get out of my way, get off the road," and blah blah blah. And it's like, no, that's so horrible. That is so anti-Christian in my opinion. How could I think that way? And so what I've been trying to do to change that mindset and that initial reaction is to just pray for him. So the person that I drove past the other day I saw it, and I told myself that I needed to pray for him and just pray for their soul and pray that God puts people in their life that he can work through to draw them nearer to him, and pray for their souls. Yeah. And I think I am not trying to be like, "Oh, check out what I did," because I suck as a human being. Okay. I suck. I can
attest to it.
Yeah. I used to say, like, to friends that weren't Christians, like, I'm a Christian, but I'm not, I'm not a good example. I'm not like blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I'm the perfect example of a Christian. You want to know why? Because you can see how flawed and just broken I am, and it's not about me, right? Like that's why I'm the perfect example of a Christian, because it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with my works. It has everything to do with God and His grace, and His love for us, regardless of what we do. And there's an analogy that was said to me in a sermon, I think, one time, about being a broken vessel, and like that's what I am as a human being. And he said, how did he put it? My only hope is that God fills me up so much that, like with life-giving oil, or I can't remember exactly the analogy, but essentially fills me up so much that it seeps out of my cracks and holes as a broken vessel, and I can fill up others. You know what I mean? And I just liked that image that he had painted there of, where I'm just a broken vessel, and the best thing I can hope for is to be filled so much with God that it seeps out of my cracks and holes, and I can, pour over into others.
That's right. That's all you can do. And that's the best way you can be a healthy person for other people, is to do what you can to fill yourself with the one who loves them the most. And it's Him. He loves them the most, so you start filling yourself with Him, and He'll help you love them. And that's all you can do. And prayer is always the best. It's hard to be like angry praying about other people and actually praying. Not like
pray for the worst of the worst, man. That's just practice it. Fake it till you make it. And that sounds ridiculous, but act like the person that you want to be. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's how you become that person. If you want to, if you've got an image of the person that you want to be in the future, if you want to be jacked, or like whatever your goal is in the future, act like just start acting like it. Act like you're, ripped. Well, okay, what does someone who's jacked do? Well, they go to the gym all the time. They work out. They eat healthy. They drink protein shakes. Food. Start acting that way. You know what I mean? If that's how you want to be,
things will start happening.
Yeah. If you want to be a godly man, well, what does a godly man do? What does he look like?
Acts like Christ.
He's in the Word every single day. Yeah, he acts like Christ. Like Christ is at the center of his life.
Just start being like him.
Just do that. And you will be that man someday.
Yes. So there you go.
Yeah, fake it till you make it.
So many advice.
I know, just these little golden nuggets. Oh, you're welcome, world.
It's all for you guys. So enjoy.
We do it for the fans.
Start doing it.
Yeah.
So, but I think we're done.
Sure. Call it quits.
That's it. We're out.
It out.
Adios. Ciao.
Arrivederci.
And we're done.